They gave a dying foal to a broke cowboy as a joke, but years later, what that horse did made an entire town go silent. Under the burning sky of New Mexico, a poor cowboy was handed a half-dead foal in front of a laughing crowd, a gift meant to shame him. But he took the rope anyway, whispering something no one heard. Years later, when that same horse stepped into the light again, the laughter stopped. And Silver Mesa was never the same. The air above Silver Mesa Rodeo shimmered like glass. It was the last weekend of summer, when the desert sun baked everything that dared to stand still. The fairground was full of noise, vendors frying corn dogs, children chasing each other with balloons, and the metallic rasp of an old speaker spilling country tunes into the dust. When the announcer called for quiet, the laughter faded into a restless murmur. Sheriff Wade Larkin stepped onto the wooden stage, his boots polished bright, his voice booming through the mic. "Folks," he drawled, "today we honor a man who's fallen on hard times, but still wears his hat high." The crowd shifted. Some smirked. Others waited for the punchline. Then they brought it out, a small, trembling foal, its ribs showing, one leg dragging slightly in the sand. The animal blinked through a curtain of flies, its breath shallow as smoke. Wade tugged the rope forward with mock ceremony. "To our friend Eli Mercer," he announced, "we present this fine young horse. If he can keep it alive till Christmas, maybe luck'll find him again." Laughter broke open like thunder. Some clapped, others whistled. Cameras flashed. The dust swirled between the stage and the crowd, a thin red veil that couldn't hide the cruelty in their smiles. Eli stood near the fence, lean and silent. His shirt was sun-bleached, his hands scarred from years of work that no longer existed. Once, he'd been a cowboy who broke stallions for a living. Now he fixed fences no one needed mended. When Wade's words reached him, he didn't flinch. He just stepped forward, slow and steady, like a man walking into a storm he already knew. He took the rope gently, fingers brushing the colt's neck. The animal shied, nostrils flaring. "Easy," Eli said, his voice dry and calm. "You're scared. So was I once." For a moment, the laughter thinned. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Wade's grin faltered, but only for a breath. The sheriff tipped his hat, chuckling. "Guess he's found himself a mirror," someone shouted. And the laughter rolled again. Eli didn't answer. He turned his back to the stage, the foal limping beside him. The crowd parted with uneasy curiosity. A child whispered, "Mama, why's he taking it?" No one replied. As he reached the end of the fairground, a gust lifted the dust behind him, wrapping man and animal in the same rust-colored haze. The sound of applause, engines, and laughter faded until only the wind remained. He walked past the diner, past the gas, pumps where flies circled the sweet spill of fuel, past a cracked billboard that still promised freedom. Made in America. By the time the sun touched the ridge, Eli and the foal had left Silver Mesa behind. The highway bent into open land, nothing but scrub, rock, and wind-torn sky. The foal stumbled once, then again, nearly falling. Eli steadied it with both hands, whispering, "One step's all you owe the world." They reached the edge of a dried creek bed, where an old trailer leaned against the horizon like a tired secret. Its windows were clouded with dust. The roof sagged in the middle. Eli led the foal inside the half-fallen corral, tying the rope to a nail in the post. The last of the daylight burned low, staining everything in shades of copper and ash. Inside the trailer, he filled a rusted pan with water, half of which leaked through the cracks. The foal sniffed, then drank greedily, its thin throat pulsing. Eli watched, arms folded, the smell of dust and gasoline clinging to his clothes. "Guess you're tougher than they think," he murmured. When night came, the desert turned cold and blue. Coyotes howled somewhere far off, and the stars leaned close, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Eli sat on the porch steps, a tin cup in hand, staring at the shape of the foal curled under a torn blanket. The animal twitched in its sleep, dreaming of something only the wild remember. He thought of the fairground, the faces, the laughter, Wade's shiny boots, and felt an old ache rise in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Just the hollow weight of being seen as less than alive. He turned the cup in his hand and spoke softly, not sure if he meant it for the foal or himself. "We'll prove 'em wrong." Quietly. The wind sighed through the sagebrush, carrying the faint scent of rain that never came. Inside, the foal stirred, let out a low, fragile whinny. Eli stood, opened the door, and looked back once more at the dark line of the town far behind him. A string of yellow lights trembled on the horizon, small, distant, already forgetting him. He knelt by the animal, adjusting the blanket, feeling its heart race against his palm. The heat of that heartbeat surprised him, strong and desperate. "You got more fight than they know," he whispered. The foal blinked up at him, eyes reflecting the glow from the oil lamp. For a breath, Eli imagined he saw understanding there, a flicker of shared defiance in a world that had room for neither. Outside, the desert wind rose again, swirling dust across the moonlight like a veil of gold. Eli closed his eyes and let the sound fill him, the whisper of grit, the faint rhythm of breathing. He didn't know why he'd taken the foal. Maybe pity. Maybe stubborn pride. But somewhere in that stillness, a small, unspoken promise took root. Not a vow shouted to the sky, but a quiet agreement between two broken things. We stay. We try. And beneath that vast American night, where hope was just another word for survival, a poor cowboy and a dying foal began something no one else would ever understand, until years later, when the dust itself remembered their names. The desert had its own kind of silence, one that hummed instead of whispered, like the air itself was holding its breath. When dawn slid over the hills of Silver Mesa, the light was thin, hesitant, turning the world the color of bone. Eli Mercer stood by the corral, his breath a pale cloud in the chill. The little foal, still trembling, tried to stand, but its legs bent beneath it like reeds. He had no feed left except a handful of oats he'd borrowed from a neighbor months ago. He poured them into a cracked bowl, mixed them with warm water, and watched the animal sniff, hesitate, then eat. Slow, clumsy, but alive. "That's it," he murmured. "You're doing better than most." Inside the trailer, everything smelled of rust and time. The walls were patched with duct tape, the table bowed in the middle, and an old photograph of a woman rested crooked on a nail. Her smile was soft, her eyes caught mid-laughter. He didn't look at it often. Some memories, like wounds, closed only when left alone. As the sun rose higher, dust glittered in the air like crushed glass. A small voice came from behind the fence. Mr. Eli, you feeding that thing or burying it? It was Jonah Rivera, the neighbor boy, 10, maybe 11, thin as wire, with a baseball cap too big for his head. He clutched a bundle of dry hay and a face full of curiosity. Eli smirked. Guess that depends which way the wind blows. Jonah grinned back and climbed the fence without asking permission. My mama says you used to ride bulls, he said. You don't look like a bull rider. Eli chuckled dryly. I used to look like a lot of things. The foal stirred, ears twitching at the boy's voice. Jonah crouched, holding out the hay. He's kinda ugly, he said, then more softly. But he's trying. Trying's enough, Eli said. They worked in silence after that, man and boy, brushing dirt off the foal's coat, fixing the loose boards of the pen. Sweat cut lines through the dust on their faces. Above them, hawks circled in the white sky, their shadows flickering over the sand. When the sun began to drop, Eli lit an old kerosene lamp. The flame wobbled, staining the walls amber. Jonah sat cross-legged on the floor, carving something small from a piece of wood with his pocket knife. The faint scraping sound mixed with the quiet breath of the foal, who now lay curled near the doorway, eyes half closed. What you making? Eli asked. A horse, Jonah said, holding up the shape. For him, when he gets better. Eli nodded. You think he will? Jonah shrugged. Maybe. You will too. The answer caught Eli off guard. He turned away, busying himself with the lamp. You talk too much, kid. Jonah grinned, unconcerned. Mama says I talk, 'cause silence makes grown-ups sad. Eli smiled, but there was truth in that. Silence did make the past louder. He reached down and checked the foal's leg, tracing the thin line of bone under the skin. The animal flinched, but didn't pull away. He's got spirit, Eli said quietly. What's his name? Jonah asked. Eli looked out the window. The last light of the day caught the dust in the air, making it glow red like sparks from a dying fire. He looks like ember dust, Jonah whispered, eyes wide. Eli repeated it under his breath. Ember. He nodded once. Yeah, that fits. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the smell of sage and distant rain. The foal stirred, letting out a weak but clear sound, a first attempt at claiming the night. Jonah laughed, clapping his hands. He talked! Eli leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching boy and horse in the flicker of lamplight. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. Not joy exactly, but its younger cousin, hope, the kind that grows quietly, like grass through stone. When Jonah's mother called from down the road, the boy packed his carving knife and ran, promising to return tomorrow. The door creaked shut behind him, and the house settled into its usual hush. Eli poured himself a cup of coffee gone lukewarm, sat by the window, and looked out at the foal. The little creature had finally fallen asleep, its chest rising and falling slow and steady. He thought of the rodeo, of Wade's laughter, of the faces that turned away. He lifted the cup, as if in a private toast. To the ones still breathing, he said. The wind answered with a low sigh. Somewhere beyond the dunes, thunder rolled, distant, hollow, the kind that promised rain and then changed its mind. He leaned back, boots crossed, eyes half closed. The lamp burned lower, its light trembling with every breath the wind took through the cracks in the trailer. For the first time since his wife's passing, Eli didn't dream of fire or loss. He dreamed of hooves pressing into sand, steady, determined, moving toward something brighter, And when morning came, a faint sound woke him, a soft scrape, followed by a hesitant step. He turned and saw Ember, standing for the first time on its own, swaying slightly but upright, staring at the door as if waiting for the horizon to open. Eli exhaled a shaky laugh. "Well," he said, "looks like the wind's blowing our way today." By the time autumn found Silver Mesa, the air had lost its edge. Days stretched quiet and slow, the kind of silence that hummed under the skin. Eli Mercer woke before dawn now, his body remembering the rhythm of work. The trailer smelled of metal polish and hay instead of rust and regret. Each morning began with the same small ritual: a whistle, a step, a hand pressed gently to a horse's neck. Ember had learned to stand without shaking, though the old limp lingered like a half-healed memory. When Eli brushed its coat, dust rose in soft clouds, glowing gold in the morning light. It looked almost holy. Still, there were things Eli didn't know: how to strengthen a leg that had never carried its own weight, how to fit shoes to bone still soft as clay. The farrier he used to call had long since moved on. So one afternoon, he drove his truck past the edge of town to find Mr. Tanner, the old blacksmith who'd once taught him how to shoe a stallion back when his hands were steady and his eyes were young. Tanner's forge sat behind a rusted gate, half swallowed by mesquite trees. Smoke curled lazily from a short chimney, carrying the smell of iron and oil. The old man was there, hunched over the anvil, one eye clouded white, the other sharp as flint. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Mercer," he rasped, wiping soot from his beard. "Heard you quit on the world." Eli leaned against the doorway, hat low. "World quit on me first." Tanner chuckled, the sound rough as gravel. "You bring something that needs fixin'?" "Yeah," Eli said, "and maybe someone who does too." He led Ember forward. The old man's hand found the horse's neck with surprising gentleness. "Thin," he murmured, tracing the curve of the foal's leg. "But there's fight in him. I can feel it." For the rest of the afternoon, sparks danced in the dim forge light. Eli held the iron steady while Tanner hammered, shaping the curve of a shoe as thin as a prayer. "Don't rush the heat," Tanner said over the ringing. "Steel ain't about force, it's about patience. Same with livin'. You rush it, you crack it." When the shoe cooled, Tanner fitted it to Ember's hoof. The animal flinched once, then stood still. The sound of nails tapping into iron was almost tender. "Good," Tanner muttered. "He trusts you already. Don't waste that." Eli nodded, sweat streaking his temples. The forge light caught the edge of his face, and for a moment he looked younger, like a man reintroduced to purpose. "I thought I forgot how to do this," he said quietly. "You didn't forget," Tanner said. "You just stopped believing you still could." Outside, the day bled into red dusk. They worked until the last ember in the forge dimmed to ash. When Eli finally loaded Ember into the truck, Tanner handed him a small box of nails wrapped in cloth. "For next time," he said, "keep the rhythm, not the rules." The drive home was long and silver with moonlight. The highway cut through fields of sage, their tips glowing pale blue under the stars. Ember shifted in the trailer. Restless but calm, Eli lowered the window and let the cold wind hit his face. It carried the scent of iron, smoke, and a strange kind of hope. the kind that felt earned. Back at the corral, Jonah waited, half asleep against the fence, a flashlight dying in his hand. "You really went all the way to Tanner's?" he mumbled. "Couldn't let him rust before I did," Eli said, smiling. The boy ran his hand over Ember's shoulder. "He looks taller." Eli shrugged. "Maybe I'm just shorter?" They both laughed, the sound small but real. That night, Eli didn't drink coffee or stare out the window. He sat by the forge he'd built from scrap, hammering nails into the soft glow of fire. Ember stood nearby, watching, as if understanding that the man was mending himself too. When the last spark died, Eli walked to the fence and looked up. The stars were sharp, close enough to cut the dark. He whispered into the wind, "Step, stop, trust." The words drifted outward, settling into the night like embers on sand. In the days that followed, his life took a quiet shape again. He worked at a feed store for cash, fixed fences for neighbors, and always returned before sunset to the small corral. Ember learned commands faster than most horses Eli had trained. Sometimes he'd stop mid-task just to watch the foal breathe. Steady, proud, alive. Jonah kept visiting after school, carving tiny horses from driftwood and leaving them lined on the fence. Each one looked a little stronger, a little more sure-footed than the last. "They're a family now," the boy said once. Eli didn't argue. As winter crept closer, a windstorm swept across Silver Mesa, painting the sky in brown and red. Eli stood at the doorway, watching dust spin like ghosts. Ember stood inside the pen, head high, refusing to hide. Tanner's words echoed in his mind. "Steel ain't about force. It's about patience." He stepped into the storm, shoulders squared. "Come on, Ember," he said, voice cutting through the wind. "We've got more to prove." The horse followed, unafraid. Together they disappeared into the blur of sand and wind, two silhouettes moving steady against everything that tried to erase them. And when morning came, the storm was gone, leaving behind a silence clean enough to start over. The desert had forgotten rain. For 3 long months, Silver Mesa baked under a white sky that never blinked. The ground cracked like old skin, and the air itself felt tired. Even the wind had turned dry, carrying only dust and the sound of fences creaking. Eli Mercer rose each morning before sunrise to keep Ember moving. Short walks at first, then slow trots along the edge of the property. The horse had grown stronger, its coat darker now, streaked with red-brown light when the sun hit. Still, there was a fragility in that left leg, a whisper of weakness that reminded Eli not everything mends easy. He'd learned patience from the forge, but patience was not peace. Nights stretched long and restless. He would lie awake, listening to the world hold its breath, wondering when it might exhale again. Jonah visited less now that school had started, and Tanner had grown too frail to work much in the heat. It was just the man and the horse most days, and the silence between them had turned into something like prayer. Then, one afternoon, the sky broke. It began as a shiver of wind, then the distant growl of thunder. Eli looked up from the trough, blinking against the brightness that rolled across the horizon. Within minutes, the smell of rain filled the air, metallic, electric, full of promise. The first drops hit hard, exploding in dust clouds that sizzled on contact. Ember jerked his head, startled, ears flicking. "It's just water," Eli said, smiling. though his voice was swallowed by the storm. He'd forgotten what real rain felt like, how it beat against the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. In moments, the corral turned to mud. The sky went black, lightning splitting it like torn cloth. Then came the slip. Ember tried to move, but lost his footing on the slick ground. The sound was quick, a crack, a cry, and then the horse went down hard. Eli's breath caught. He rushed forward, falling to his knees beside the animal. Ember's leg was bent under him, trembling violently. "Easy," Eli whispered, his hands slick with mud. "Don't fight it." He tried to lift the leg, but Ember thrashed, eyes wide with panic. The storm roared, drowning his voice. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking the ground beneath them. Headlights flashed through the curtain of rain. A truck door slammed. A woman's voice cut through the noise, steady, commanding. "Move aside." Eli looked up, blinded by the downpour. The figure running toward him wore a yellow slicker, her dark hair plastered to her face. She knelt by Ember without hesitation, her hands sure and calm. "He's in shock," she said, breathless. "We need to keep him still." "Who the hell are you?" Eli shouted over the wind. "Dr. Maya Brooks, vet clinic out of Santa Fe. My truck broke down near the highway. I saw your light." She ran her hands along Ember's body, feeling the muscles, the bone beneath. "It's not broken," she said finally. "Dislocated." Eli's relief was instant, but brief. "Can you fix it?" "I can try," she said, pulling a small medical kit from her bag. "Hold his head. Don't let him kick." Rain hammered the tin roof of the shed as she worked. Her gloves shone with water and blood, her face set in quiet focus. Ember trembled, nostrils flaring, but didn't fight. Maya's voice stayed low and even. "Almost there, boy. Just breathe." There was a sharp pop, a heavy exhale, and then stillness. Ember's breathing steadied. The legs straightened, shaking but aligned. Maya sat back on her heels, mud streaking her cheek. Eli looked at her, chest heaving. "You just saved him." She shrugged. "He did most of the work. He wanted to stay." The rain softened outside, turning from a scream to a whisper. Eli found himself staring at her, the way her hands moved, careful but certain, the steadiness in her voice. "You drive all the way from Santa Fe?" he asked. "Just passing through," she said. "Didn't expect a house out here." "Didn't expect company either, for these. First time that night," she smiled. "Guess we're both unlucky." They sat in the half-light of the lantern, the storm easing to a drizzle. Ember's sides rose and fell slowly, eyes half closed, exhausted but alive. Maya checked his pulse one more time, then scribbled something on a piece of paper torn from her notebook. She handed it to Eli. The ink bled at the edges from the rain, but the words were still clear enough to read. "Some things heal slow, but they do heal." She stood to leave. "Keep him warm tonight," she said, "and try not to lose hope. It's bad for the heart." Eli watched her climb back into her truck, headlights carving thin tunnels through the rain. When the sound faded, he looked down at the note again. The letters shimmered faintly in the lamplight. He turned to Ember. "You hear that? You got yourself an angel who swears." The horse flicked an ear, as if agreeing. He found an old blanket and draped it over the animal, then sat beside him, knees drawn up, watching the last drops fall from the roof. The desert had taken the rain greedily, swallowing it into its cracks. The smell of wet earth filled the air, a scent so rare it felt holy. Eli leaned his head against the wooden post, eyes heavy. "You're not dying on me," he murmured. "Not you." Outside, the storm drifted east, leaving only puddles that mirrored the stars. The note lay beside the lamp, curling as it dried. He didn't know yet why those words mattered so much. He only knew they did. By morning, the mud had begun to harden again. The sky was empty, washed clean, pretending nothing had happened. But something had changed. When Ember lifted his head and met Eli's gaze, there was no fear, only trust. Eli knelt beside him, brushing away the dried mud from his coat. "You and me," he said softly. "We ain't going anywhere." And though the rain never came again that season, the ground inside that corral stayed alive. Nights in the desert always returned colder after a storm. The world seemed rinsed of color, quieter, as if it was still deciding whether to begin again. Eli Mercer sat on the porch steps of his trailer, the old note from Dr. Maya Brooks folded in his palm. Some things heal slow, but they do heal. The words had dried stiff, edges curled, yet he found himself reading them every few hours, as though the paper might change if he stared long enough. Inside the corral, Ember slept beneath a patchwork of old blankets. The leg still trembled, but the swelling had gone down. His breathing was steady, slow. From the trailer window, the lamplight spilled out across the dirt like a quiet fire, touching the horse's flank. The glow turned his coat from brown to copper. Eli could almost believe the animal was made of light. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, boots planted on the cold floor, listening to the faint sounds of the desert. Wind brushing wire, a coyote calling somewhere beyond the ridge. Around midnight, he heard the shuffle of small feet. The door creaked open, and a sleepy voice broke the stillness. "You didn't answer when I knocked," said Jonah, rubbing his eyes. "Mama said you might need help." Eli chuckled softly. "Don't you kids ever quit worrying?" "Only when you stop looking like ghosts," Jonah said, setting down a small bundle of hay. His words carried more honesty than a child should have. They stepped into the corral together. Ember lifted his head at the sound of Jonah's voice. The boy knelt beside him, his hand gentle on the horse's neck. "He's warm," he said. "He's alive," Eli corrected. "That's all that matters." Jonah unwrapped something from his jacket pocket, a wooden horse he'd been carving for weeks, its legs uneven, the tail roughly shaped but full of intention. He placed it near Ember's head. "So he's got a friend when you're sleeping," he said. Eli felt his throat tighten. "That's a good thing, son. World could use more friends that don't talk." The hours passed in slow rhythm, the quiet drip from the eaves, Ember's shallow breaths, the soft murmur of Jonah telling stories about the stars outside. When the boy finally fell asleep in the hay, Eli stayed awake. He watched the lamp flame flicker and thought about what Maya had said before leaving. Don't lose hope. It's bad for the heart. Hope. He'd never liked that word. Hope was what people whispered when they couldn't promise anything. Yet now, sitting there in the stillness, he felt it stir in his chest, small, persistent, impossible to ignore. Before dawn, he rose and poured warm water into a tin pail, adding a spoonful of salt. He massaged Ember's leg as Tanner had taught him, slow and steady. The horse shifted, eyes half-lidded, but didn't pull away. "We're fixing you up, partner," Eli said. "Ain't no point dying in a place this empty." When sunlight finally broke across the valley, it came soft and gold. Jonah stirred awake, blinking at the new light. "He's standin'," the boy whispered, disbelief in his voice. Eli turned. Ember was on his feet, shaky but upright. The bandaged leg held firm, muscles quivering under the skin. For a second, the whole world seemed to pause. The light, the air, even Eli's heartbeat. He felt something unclench inside him, a knot that had been tightening for years. Jonah grinned, running forward. "He's doing it, Mr. Eli." Eli nodded, his eyes shining, though he didn't smile. "He's rememberin' how." That day, they stayed close to the corral. Eli repaired a section of fence, Jonah fed Ember handfuls of grain, and the desert wind carried the faint smell of mesquite and oil from Tanner's forge miles away. In the quiet rhythm of those hours, something fragile yet whole began to form between the three of them. A man, a boy, and an animal that refused to quit. That night, Eli built a small fire outside the trailer. He didn't drink anymore. Instead, he watched the flames curl and fall, each spark rising into the dark like a prayer for things that deserved another chance. Ember stood just beyond the light, head bowed, the wooden horse still resting near his hoof. "You ever notice," Eli said, his voice almost a whisper, "how some fires don't burn to stay alive? They burn to keep you from going cold?" Jonah, half asleep by the fire, murmured, "Like him?" Eli nodded. "Yeah, like him." The desert night deepened, wrapping them in blue silence. Eli found himself remembering the laughter at the rodeo, the jeers, the way Wade's boots gleamed under that cruel sun. But the anger no longer burned. It had cooled into something steadier, like iron tempered in water. "You and me," he said quietly to Ember. "We'll show them what endurance looks like." Ember flicked an ear at the sound, eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. His breath came slow and even, white against the cold air. He wasn't afraid anymore. Neither was Eli. As dawn neared, clouds gathered faintly over the distant ridge, a rare promise of weather. Eli smiled at the horizon, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Looks like the world's remembering us," he said. He didn't know it then, but that night, their quiet vigil by the dying fire, would be remembered years later as the moment everything began to change. Not with thunder or applause, but with a single shared heartbeat echoing through the dark. And when the first light touched the corral, it glinted off the nails of the new fence, off the edge of the wooden horse, off the sheen of Ember's healing coat. It looked almost like the land itself was glowing from within. Eli stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, and whispered, "Let's get to work." Ember took a step toward him, limping once, then steady. The boy stirred awake, eyes wide at the sight. Together they watched as the horse began to move. Slow, cautious, but determined. Across the pen, each step a quiet defiance of the past. The morning wind picked up, swirling ashes from the old fire into the air. They rose and shimmered in the light, tiny embers, refusing to die. By early spring, Silver Mesa looked new again, at least on the surface. The fields had turned a brief, stubborn green, and the air carried that deceptive sweetness of dust right before summer burned it away. Eli Mercer leaned on the fence rail, watching Ember trot slow circles in the corral. The horse moved smooth now, strong through the shoulders, the healed leg flexing with quiet pride. 3 months earlier, Eli had doubted the animal would ever stand. Now he looked at him and thought, Maybe I was the one that needed fixing. The town had started to notice too. Strangers driving past would slow their trucks just to stare. A few even stopped to ask if that was the crippled horse from last year's rodeo. Eli never answered. He just smiled, the kind that said, "Believe what you want." By the time the feed store gossip made its way to the sheriff's office, Wade Larkin couldn't ignore it. He'd built his reputation on two things: money and the ability to make other men feel smaller. The idea that Eli, the poor ranch hand he once humiliated in front of the whole town, was now the subject of admiration unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. One Friday evening, while the sun went down red over the ridge, Eli heard the rumble of a truck approaching. He knew the sound before he saw it. Wade's old Ford stopped just outside the gate, engine idling like a growl. "Evenin', Mercer," Wade called, stepping out, hat tipped low. His coat was pressed, his boots spotless, same as the day of the rodeo. "Heard you've been making a miracle out here." Eli didn't move from the fence. "Just keeping things alive." Wade's smile tightened. "Well, it's drawing attention. Folks talking about that horse like he's some kind of sign from God. You know how this town gets when it's bored." He paused, looking over Eli's shoulder. "That him?" Ember stood still under the setting sun, chest gleaming like copper, mane lifted by the wind. Wade whistled low. "Damn. He's something. Could fetch a price." He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a check. The paper caught the light. 10,000, cash by Monday. Eli looked at it, but didn't touch it. "You keep your paper. I don't sell family." The smile vanished. Wade's eyes hardened. "Family? He's an animal, Mercer. He'll die same as any of us. Only difference is, he can't choose when." Eli's jaw worked once before he spoke. "Maybe, but he still knows what it means to stand." The silence stretched, heavy as heat. Wade folded the check and slid it back into his pocket. "You talk like a preacher these days. Shame sermons don't buy hay." A small voice piped up from behind the trailer. "We don't need your money." Jonah came running, dust puffing under his bare feet. "He listens to us. That's worth more than your stupid check." "Jonah." Eli's tone was soft but firm. The boy stopped, glaring at Wade. Wade gave a slow, amused smile. "Careful, kid. Talk like that'll get you nowhere." Eli rested a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "That depends where you're trying to go." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowing. "You always had a way with words, Mercer. Too bad they don't feed you." He turned back toward his truck, then paused. "Town's holding a parade next month. Veterans thing. Big crowd. You ought to bring your horse. Show folks he's more than a pity project." Eli's mouth twitched. "You want me to put on another show for you?" Wade adjusted his hat. "Think of it as redemption, or maybe a reminder of where you came from." His tone carried that old, oily confidence. "Either way, people love a comeback story. Might do you some good." Eli didn't answer. The engine roared to life, dust curling around the tires as Wade drove off into the dark. When the sound faded, Jonah let out the breath he'd been holding. "He's scared of you," the boy said. Eli chuckled without humor. "No, son. He's scared of what he can't own." That night, the air was thick with the smell of rain that never arrived. Eli stood outside the corral, watching Ember shift in the half-light. The horse seemed unsettled, nostrils flaring as if the wind carried bad news. He stroked its mane, whispering, "Don't mind him. He's just noise." Inside the trailer, the note from Maya still hung on the wall, corners curling with time. He read it again before bed. Some things heal slow, but they do heal. The words felt different now. Less about wounds, more about pride. Maybe this was what healing looked like, learning when not to bite back. The next morning, Dr. Maya Brooks arrived unannounced, her pickup leaving a trail of dust behind it. She climbed out, still in her work clothes, a stethoscope hanging from her neck. "Heard Sheriff Larkin's been sniffing around," she said, walking straight to the corral. Eli nodded. "He's got a new hobby, counting what ain't his." She crouched beside Ember, running her hands along his legs, feeling for heat or swelling. "He's stronger," she said. "Good work." Eli leaned on the post, watching her. "You always show up right when trouble starts?" Maya smiled without looking up. "Only when the trouble thinks it's bigger than it is." She stood, brushing dust from her knees. "Don't let that man get under your skin, Eli. He doesn't know what to do with someone who doesn't bow." Eli looked toward the horizon, where Wade's property sat like a scar across the desert. "He'll come back. They always do." Maya met his eyes. "Then be ready, but not angry. Anger's just the same chain in a different hand." The wind kicked up, swirling sand between them. Her words lingered long after she drove away. That night, Eli sat by the forge Tanner had left him, the coals glowing soft and steady. He worked a piece of scrap iron into a small ring, shaping it slow. Each strike echoed against the dark. When it cooled, he ran his thumb across the smooth edge, thinking of Wade's check, Wade's smirk, Wade's challenge. He slipped the ring onto a nail above the stall door. "We don't bow," he said softly. Ember's ear twitched toward the sound. Days passed, each one edged with tension. People from town stopped by with curious smiles and questions he didn't care to answer. Jonah came after school, repeating rumors he'd overheard. How Wade was planning something big, how the parade would bring the governor's aid, maybe even reporters. Eli kept his eyes on the corral. "Let him talk," he said. "Wind don't change the mountain." When the sun went down, he found himself thinking of Maya again, the way her voice softened. When she spoke to the horse, how her hands never shook, not even under pressure. He caught himself smiling and shook his head. "You're getting soft, old man," he muttered. From outside came the sound of hooves scraping against wood. Ember was restless, pacing the pen, head tossing. Eli stepped out, bare feet in the cold dirt. "Easy," he whispered. "Not every noise means a storm." The horse stilled, nostrils flaring. Eli rested a hand against his shoulder, feeling the slow thud of a steady heart. The stars above them burned hard and close, their light sharp as needles. Somewhere out in the distance, thunder rolled again. But this time, it wasn't from the sky. It was the echo of engines, the first hint of something coming that neither man nor horse could yet name. And as the night thickened, Eli knew the quiet life he'd built was about to be tested again, not by cruelty, but by pride, and the ghosts of men who never learned to lose. The morning of the parade came wrapped in dust and sunlight, that soft gold that only New Mexico knew how to make. Eli Mercer stood beside Ember, adjusting the reins with hands that didn't quite feel steady. The town of Silver Mesa had never looked louder. Flags snapping in the wind, children chasing one another between food stalls, the air heavy with the smell of roasted corn and motor oil. On the main street, the band tuned their instruments, brass flashing like mirrors in the sun. Somewhere in that noise, Eli heard his own heartbeat. He hadn't planned to ride. He hadn't wanted to. But after Wade's visit, there was no escaping it. The sheriff's voice had spread through town like smoke. "Mercer's bringing that horse of his. Let's see if it can even walk straight." Now, as Eli tightened the saddle strap, Jonah hovered nearby, trying not to show how nervous he was. "You sure about this, Mr. Eli?" he asked. "No," Eli said plainly. "But we'll do it anyway." The horse turned his head at the sound of his name, nostrils flaring, mane glinting like fire in the sun. He looked every bit the creature no one believed he could become. Tall, balanced, eyes calm, but alive. The scar down his left leg caught the light and gleamed like silver. From across the square, Wade Larkin appeared in his full uniform, riding a glossy black stallion that looked carved from tar. His smile was thin, rehearsed. "Hope you don't mind me leadin' the way, Mercer," he called, voice carrying above the noise. "Wouldn't dream of getting in your way," Eli replied. When the horn signaled the start, the line of riders began to move. Veterans, ranchers, men in pressed shirts who hadn't seen a hard day in years. Eli rode at the end, keeping Ember's pace slow, steady. The crowd's chatter softened to whispers as they passed. Some smiled. Others shook their heads. Halfway down Main Street, a car backfired near the bandstand. The noise cracked through the air like a gunshot. Ember jolted, muscles tensing, head jerking high. For a split second, Eli saw the panic flash across his eyes, the memory of pain, of falling, of storms that once buried them both. "Easy," Eli said, leaning forward. "Step, stop, trust." The words fell out like breath. Ember stilled. His ears flicked, listening, then relaxed. The parade kept moving, but the street ahead narrowed where the paving broke into uneven patches. Eli felt the horse hesitate, weight shifting unevenly to the injured leg. He thought of turning back. Then he heard laughter. Faint, but sharp. Wade's voice. "Guess miracles don't last long out here." Eli's jaw tightened. He pressed his palm to Ember's neck. "Show him, boy." The horse stepped forward. One step, then another. The limp smoothed into stride, the stride into rhythm. The crowd's laughter dimmed. The flags along the fences rustled as if the wind itself was watching. When they reached the center of the square, Wade turned in his saddle, calling, "That's far enough, Mercer. Don't push your luck." But Eli didn't stop. Ember's hooves struck the ground like drum beats, slow and deliberate. The sunlight hit them both full on, wrapping man and animal in copper. Then, without cue or command, Ember stopped, stood tall, and lowered one knee to the ground. The crowd gasped. For a long moment, everything was silent except the low creak of leather and the flutter of flags overhead. Ember stayed bowed, head down, like he was saluting something unseen. A hush rolled through the square, a hush so heavy even the band forgot to play. Then came a sound, soft at first, then growing, the rustle of hats being lifted, one by one, as the veterans along the sidewalk stood to their feet. Some were old, some scarred, all of them quiet. They understood. The horse wasn't bowing to them. It was bowing with them, to every battle they never finished, every memory they carried like a wound that never healed. Jonah wiped at his face with the back of his hand. "He's not scared," he whispered. "He's proud." Eli swallowed hard, looking down at the horse beneath him. "Yeah," he said softly. "He's remembering what it means to stand tall, even on your knees." When Ember rose again, the crowd erupted. The sound was not laughter this time. It was applause, raw and uneven, but real. Children cheered. Women clapped. Even a few of Wade's men whistled. Wade himself sat motionless, his smile frozen, eyes dark as oil. Eli guided Ember to the side, letting the others pass. He didn't need to lead the parade anymore. He'd already gone further than any of them expected. After the last float disappeared down Main Street, the crowd began to scatter. Wade dismounted, his boots clicking on the asphalt. "That little stunt," he said, voice tight, "wasn't part of the plan." Eli looked at him. Maybe that's why it worked. For once, Wade didn't have an answer. He turned away, but something in his shoulders looked smaller now, less certain. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, Jonah ran up to Eli, grinning ear to ear. "You did it! You both did!" Eli shook his head. "No, son. He did." He reached down, patting Ember's neck. The horse snorted softly, ears flicking forward. They started the walk home together, slow and quiet. The street was nearly empty now, the echoes of applause fading into the hum of crickets. At the edge of town, Maya's truck was parked, her window rolled down. "You looked good out there," she said. Eli smiled faintly. "He did all the work." Maya's eyes softened. "You gave him something to believe in." He thought about that as he walked away. The desert wind rose again, catching the last of the daylight and turning it to gold. It swirled around them, man, horse, and boy, until the road ahead looked like it was on fire. Jonah pointed. "The sky's burning." Eli smiled. "Nah, that's just the world remembering his name." They disappeared into that glowing dust, the sound of hooves fading slow, like a heartbeat settling after a long race. When the last echo of applause drifted off the street, Silver Mesa felt smaller, emptied out by its own noise. The banners sagged, and the smell of fried dough and sweat hung low over the square. Eli Mercer led Ember through the thinning crowd, one hand resting lightly on the horse's neck. Every step sounded louder than it should have, hoofbeats clicking against the cooling asphalt. People still watched them, but now their faces carried something Eli hadn't seen in years. Quiet respect. He said nothing. He just walked, letting the rhythm of the horse's breathing settle the tremor that had lived in his chest all day. The sun was setting, spreading red fire across the horizon. From the steps of the courthouse, Wade Larkin stood alone, coat slung over his arm, watching them go. Their eyes met for half a second. No challenge, no triumph, just recognition of a truth neither could deny. Wade looked away first. By the time Eli reached the edge of town, the world had fallen almost silent again. Jonah walked beside him, the boy's small hand gripping the rope. The air had cooled, the first stars creeping through the last of the daylight. "You think he knew what he was doing, kneeling like that?" Jonah asked. Eli smiled faintly. "Some things don't need teaching. They just happen when the heart remembers." At the far end of Main Street, a familiar truck waited. Headlights off, window rolled down. Dr. Maya Brooks leaned against the door, her dark hair pulled back, her smile easy and tired. "You stole the whole damn show," she said. Eli chuckled. "Not bad for a horse that couldn't stand a year ago." "He didn't just stand," she said, stepping closer. "He made the whole town sit still." They stood there a moment, the three of them, man, boy, and woman, watching Ember graze along the fence line, pulling at the last tufts of grass between the cracks of dry earth. The light faded slow, gold to violet to indigo. Then the first wind of night brushed past, carrying with it the smell of sage and wood smoke. When they reached the ranch, the lamps inside the trailer flickered on. Ember settled in his pen, muscles rippling under the thin sheen of sweat. Jonah poured water into a bucket, humming under his breath. Maya leaned against the fence, eyes soft. "You ever gonna let yourself be proud?" she asked. Eli loosened the reins, resting his arms on the top rail. "I ain't built for proud." "That's not what I asked." He smiled, but didn't answer. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with everything they didn't say. Somewhere in that stillness, the desert sighed, a slow exhale of heat cooling into memory. Later, after Jonah fell asleep in the old armchair, Eli and Maya sat outside by the dying fire. The coals glowed faintly, painting their faces in orange. Above them, the stars seemed close enough to touch. "You know," she said, "I used to think people only remembered big moments, births, deaths, the kind that change the world. But maybe it's the small ones that stay." Eli poked at the coals with a stick. "Like what?" "Like a horse kneeling in the middle of Main Street, or a man who finally stopped running from himself." He didn't look up. "You talk like you've been there." "I have," she said quietly. "We all have, one way or another." A long silence settled between them. The wind played through the dry grass, whispering through the old wind chimes Tanner had left behind. Eli glanced at the small metal ring hanging by the barn, the one he'd forged after Wade's visit. In the faint light, it glowed red, like it still carried a memory of fire. "I thought winning'd feel different," he said. "Bigger." Maya's voice was almost a murmur. "Maybe it's not about winning. Maybe it's about learning how to stand still." The words hit deep. Eli leaned back, his gaze drifting toward Ember, who now slept standing, weight balanced, eyes half closed. The horse's chest rose and fell in a rhythm that felt ancient, patient. "Guess he's better at that than I am," Eli said. "Then learn from him," she replied. For a while, they said nothing more. The fire dwindled to a faint shimmer, and the desert night folded around them, cool and infinite. Sometime near midnight, a soft sound broke the quiet, hooves shifting in the dirt. Eli turned to see Ember standing at the edge of the corral, head lifted toward the hills. He wasn't restless, just listening. The stars caught in his mane, silver against copper, like threads of light woven through shadow. Maya followed his gaze. "What's he hearing?" "Wind," Eli said. "Maybe his own name in it." They watched until the horizon blurred. In that long, unbroken silence, the weight of years seemed to fall away. Eli thought of his wife, of Tanner, of the old mine, of every road that had brought him here. He realized that nothing had been wasted. Not the pain, not the loss, not even the laughter that had once tried to bury him. It had all led to this, the stillness after the storm. When dawn came, it did so quietly, spilling light like warm water over the land. Maya dozed against the porch post, Jonah still curled under his blanket. Eli stood alone by the fence, coffee in hand. Ember walked toward him, slow and unhurried, and rested his head against Eli's shoulder. For a moment, neither of them moved. Eli set the cup down, his hand finding the soft spot beneath the horse's jaw. "We made it," he said softly. "Now let's make something of it." The sun climbed higher, catching on the nails of the fence and the dust in the air, turning everything the color of fire. The ranch looked different that morning, less like a wound, more like a promise. Behind him, Maya stirred, her voice still thick with sleep. "You ever think of leaving?" Eli shook his head. "Nah, the world's wide enough right here." And when the wind came again, brushing over the grass and the empty road beyond, it carried not the sound of loneliness, but of belonging. Something earned, something real. The stillness remained, not as silence, but as peace. A year slipped by in a quiet rhythm of sunrise and work. The town of Silver Mesa, once known for its noise and its pride, now whispered a softer kind of story. Out on the edge of town, where the wind moved slower and the sage grew thick, a hand-carved sign hung from a post of weathered cedar. Ember Haven Ranch, where the tired learn to stand again. The paint had faded some under the desert sun, but the words still held. People from all over began to visit. The broken, the weary, the ones who'd run out of places to run. Eli Mercer didn't advertise. He didn't have to. Word spread the way it always does when something true finds a home. The ranch had changed. What used to be a crooked pen and a rusted trailer had grown into a stretch of open land dotted with small wooden shelters. Jonah, taller now, helped fix fences and built stalls with the same hands that once carved tiny horses. He laughed more these days, though his laugh still had the softness of someone who'd seen the world from the side of pain. Dr. Maya Brooks came every weekend, her truck rattling up the dirt road like clockwork, bringing medicine, coffee, and a quiet steadiness that had long since become part of the place. And at the center of it all stood Ember. He was older now, broader through the shoulders, his coat gone from red to something between copper and dusk. When the light hit just right, he still looked like fire. Only slower, gentler, like a flame learning to breathe instead of burn. He had become more than a horse. He was a story written in motion. Children climbed his back for their first rides. Soldiers with haunted eyes learned to breathe again against his steady rhythm. He never shied, never rushed. He simply waited until whoever sat upon him remembered how to trust the ground again. Eli watched them all from the fence line most mornings, coffee steaming in one hand, his other resting on the rail. He had learned to measure time differently now, not in minutes or seasons, but in the number of lives that found a piece of peace here. Every face that left with a lighter heart became part of the ranch itself, like stones set into a wall. One morning, as the air turned gold, he found Jonah in the pasture teaching a little girl how to ride. She was small, her legs barely reaching past Ember's ribs, her laugh carrying across the open field. "Don't grip too tight," Jonah called. "He feels what you feel. You breathe calm, he breathes calm." The girl nodded, biting her lip, and loosened her hands. Ember moved forward in a slow walk, his steps matching her breathing. When she turned toward the fence, her face was glowing. "He's listening," she shouted. Jonah grinned. "He always does." Eli leaned against the post, smiling into his coffee. "You teach better than I ever did," he said when the boy joined him by the gate. "I just tell him what you told me," Jonah replied. "Step, stop, trust." The old phrase hung in the air, lighter now, less like a command and more like a prayer. That afternoon, Maya arrived, dust swirling behind her truck. She carried a bag of feed in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Your sanctuary's turning into a full-time job," she teased, nodding at the growing list of volunteers. "You ever plan to rest?" Eli smiled. "You ever plan to stop telling me to?" They stood side by side, watching the children in the field, the laughter floating between the fences. For a moment, everything felt still, the kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness, but peace earned the hard way. When the sun began to drop, they walked down to the far paddock. Ember stood there, tail swishing lazily, eyes half-lidded. The scars on his leg had faded, but not vanished. Maya ran her hand along his neck. "He's slowing down," she said softly. Eli nodded. "We all are. He'll need rest soon. So will I." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the point." Maya looked at him for a long time, the wind playing with the strands of hair that had slipped from her braid. "You ever think about what comes after?" she asked. Eli tilted his head. "After what?" "After everything. After you." Her voice was gentle, not sad. He looked out across the fields, where the last light painted the grass in ribbons of bronze. "Then it'll be their turn," he said, nodding toward Jonah and the children. "World keeps moving. All we can do is teach it to move kind." That night, the ranch glowed with lanterns strung between the posts. Someone had brought a guitar, and the air filled with music, rough and imperfect, but beautiful for it. Jonah played a simple tune, his fingers fumbling on the chords, and Maya hummed along under her breath. Eli sat nearby, sharpening an old horseshoe into a heart-shaped charm. When he finished, he handed it to Jonah. "Hang that in the barn," he said. "For luck. For remembering." Later, when everyone else had gone to sleep, Eli walked out alone to the pasture. The moon was high, white, and full. Ember stood near the fence, head lifted toward the stars. Eli approached, resting a hand on the old horse's shoulder. "We did good, you and me," he said quietly. "Didn't change the world, but maybe we changed our little piece of it." The horse exhaled through his nose, a warm gust against the cool air, as if answering. Eli chuckled softly. "That's good enough." He turned his gaze toward the hills, the dark outlines of the land stretching endless and kind. Somewhere out there, the wind shifted, carrying faint laughter, the sound of hooves, and a life once broken now made whole. The sanctuary wasn't just a place, it was a promise. When dawn came, Eli found Jonah already in the field, feeding Ember. "You're up early," Eli said. "Couldn't sleep," Jonah replied. He kept calling. Eli smiled, the kind of smile that sits behind the eyes. "Then don't keep him waiting." Jonah nodded, swinging lightly into the saddle. The morning light hit them both, washing the valley in gold. Ember moved forward, slow and sure, each step stirring dust that glittered like embers in the air. Eli watched them go, hands in his pockets, heart full. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something. The world was enough. The stillness was enough. The wind blew warm through the grass, and from somewhere deep inside him came the quiet truth he'd been carrying all along. Some hearts don't race. They endure. The summer that followed was kind, the kind of kindness that feels earned. The wind that once carried dust now carried laughter, and the fields around Ember Haven Ranch turned soft and gold. Eli Mercer sat on the porch most mornings, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the light spill over the hills. Time had slowed here, not because it had grown weaker, but because it had finally found no reason to hurry. Jonah Rivera had grown into a man before Eli realized it. His voice carried a confidence that still surprised him, though it held the same gentleness as when he'd first whispered to a dying foal years ago. He now taught the new children at the sanctuary, ones who arrived with hands that shook, or hearts that didn't trust their own rhythm. He told them, as Eli once told him, "Don't fight the fall. Learn from it." On a July morning, heavy with the scent of sage, Eli walked out to the pasture. Ember stood by the fence, head bowed slightly, coat silvered by age. He was still strong, but slower now. Each breath came with a soft rumble, like thunder far away. Eli rubbed his muzzle, his hand sinking into the course. "Mine. You and me," he said softly. "We've seen worse skies." That afternoon, the ranch filled with visitors. A group of children from a nearby town had come for their first lessons. Their laughter rolled across the field like a song without words. Jonah guided them through the basics, patient and sure, while Dr. Maya Brooks moved among them, checking straps, adjusting helmets, offering quiet smiles. She'd long since traded her city clinic for this place, saying the air here did more healing than medicine ever could. When the sun dipped low, painting the valley in amber light, Jonah called for a break. The kids sprawled in the grass, sipping lemonade, faces flushed with joy. Eli sat beneath the old sycamore, his hat tilted low, listening to their chatter. He could feel the pulse of the land around him, steady, alive. Every nail he'd hammered, every fence he'd mended, every quiet promise he'd whispered into the wind, it all led here. Maya came to sit beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "You look tired," she said. He smiled without opening his eyes. "Tired's just another word for content." She studied him for a moment. "You ever wonder what comes next?" "Next?" He took a slow sip of coffee. "Next is for them." He nodded toward Jonah and the children. "I had my turn. Now I get to watch." A hush settled over the ranch as the day slipped into evening. The children fed the horses one last time, giggling when Ember nuzzled their pockets for more apples. Jonah's voice carried across the field. "All right, say goodnight. He's got dreams to run." They waved to the horse as if he were a storybook hero. Ember lifted his head, ears flicking, and let out a soft sound, a greeting, a farewell, a little of both. Later that night, when the lanterns along the fence glowed like fireflies, Eli sat by the barn with a book he wasn't really reading. The moonlight traced silver across the ground, catching the edges of hoof prints hardened in the dirt. He thought about everything that had happened. The fairground laughter, the rain that almost drowned them, the parade, the sanctuary. All those pieces had folded into one another until they made something whole. He looked up at the open sky. "You did good, boy," he whispered. From the dark, a familiar sound answered, the soft thud of hooves, slow and even. Ember walked toward him, moving with the grace of an old soldier who'd made peace with every battle. He stopped at the fence, resting his head against Eli's shoulder. The warmth of him was grounding, like the earth remembering itself. Eli closed his eyes. "I know," he said. "I know it's time." The wind rose, carrying the scent of wildflowers. Somewhere far off, coyotes called. The world went on turning. The next morning, Jonah found them that way. Eli dozing lightly on the porch, Ember standing close by, both framed by the pale gold of dawn. For a moment, he thought they were still asleep. Then he saw the stillness in the old horse's chest, the calm that looked too deep for breath. He didn't cry. He just stood there, hand resting on Ember's neck. "You ran long enough," he said quietly. "Rest easy now." When Eli woke, Jonah told him, and they buried Ember on the ridge overlooking the pasture, the same ridge where the wind never stopped blowing. Maya carved a simple plaque from a piece of cedar. "Ember. He taught us to stand." After the small ceremony, no one spoke for a while. Then one of the children, the smallest girl, freckles across her nose, asked, "Will he ever run again?" Jonah looked toward Eli. The old man's eyes were wet but steady. "He's running now," Eli said. "You just can't see it." That evening, the ranch was quiet again. Jonah led the last group of children to the barn, showing them how to brush the new horses, how to listen for the rhythm under their fingers. Eli and Maya stayed outside, watching the sky fade from orange to violet. "You gonna be all right?" she asked. He nodded. "He did what he came to do. Now we do the same." She smiled faintly. "You always make it sound simple." "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe living's just learning to keep walking through what hurts until it turns soft." The sun disappeared behind the ridge, leaving only the faint glimmer of the plaque catching the last light. The wind carried the faintest echo of hooves, a sound that could have been memory or something more. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch breathed on. Jonah hung a photo inside the barn. Eli, younger, standing beside a horse that looked half flame, half earth. Underneath, he wrote the words, "Some hearts don't race, they endure." And in the years that followed, people still came to Ember Haven, still found pieces of themselves in the quiet. They said the place had a kind of magic, though Eli always laughed when he heard that. "Ain't magic," he'd say, "just mercy with a pulse." Every spring, when the wind shifted through the valley, the grass bent in a single long wave, like a bow to something unseen. The children swore they could hear hoofbeats in it, slow, steady, patient. Eli never told them otherwise. He'd simply tip his hat toward the ridge and whisper, "Run easy, old friend." The sound always came back, faint and sure. And so, the story of a poor cowboy and his broken horse carried on, not as legend, but as a heartbeat inside the land, enduring, like all good things that learned how to stay. If this story touched you, tell me what part stayed in your heart the longest. Leave a comment, share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles, and subscribe so you won't miss the next true tale of courage, loss, and the bond between man and horse.